Hello, I'm Stuart Tucker, and this is a sermon for October 4th, 2020. The text for today is from the book of Exodus, from the Old Testament. It is chapter 20, selected verses from verse 1 through 20. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in the heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for God will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. When all the people witnessed the thunder and lightning and the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking, they were afraid and trembled and stood at a distance, and said to Moses, You speak to us, and we will listen. Do not let God speak to us, or we will die. Moses said to the people, Do not be afraid, for God has come only to test you, and to put the fear of him upon you, so that you do not sin. Well, we've been in a pandemic and haven't met since March, and here it is October. But we are at least having this week, this coming Saturday, some little scrap of normalcy. We're going to have our church supper, but of course we can't have it indoors. It's going to be a takeout supper. And our very efficient crew that does our food pantry has figured out a way that we can safely do that and have takeout supper. I've always been impressed with the efficiency and just the joy that I see with our congregation and putting these church suppers together, all the hard work that goes in to serving a large number of people like that and how quickly they're able to do it. I always see people that I don't see on Sunday morning, not just there to eat, but to actually work. What motivates people to join in on projects like this and our other projects that don't come to church on Sunday? Do they do it for the fun? Do they do it for the fellowship? I have to believe that our inactive members or even non-members come and pitch in on something like our church dinners or harvest sale. It has something to do with gratitude, an expressionness of thankfulness to God, maybe thankfulness to this faith community. There are many ways to say thank you. How we say it depends on the situation. If the person walking in front of us holds the door open so that we can pass through, we say thank you. That's enough. If a relative from out of town sends us a birthday present or a thank you note or post something nice on Facebook. We have appropriate ways to say thank you to that. Special acts of kindness from a close friend or a family member might call for us to go out of our way. Before COVID, it would be hugs and kisses. Thank you is a response for what someone does for us, and how we say thank you fits the occasion. Saying thank you doesn't cost much. We can type those words on our Facebook timeline. We can even send a Hallmark card for a couple of bucks. Thank you can be cheap, or it could be extremely costly. Itzhak Denison's tale, Babette's Feast, is a story of a woman who expressed her gratitude to a pair of sisters who took her in. When she won a lottery, she spent the entire winnings on one incredibly rich meal for the sisters and her guests. One story of gratitude that always impressed me is one which my parents told. Every other year when I was growing up, my family would make a pilgrimage from California to Kansas and visit my grandparents and other relatives. It took almost a whole day to drive across New Mexico. It's a pretty bleak stretch. The monotony was broken by the sight of one large hotel called the Travelers Inn. It's probably 100 miles from the nearest town. According to my mother, the reason the hotel was there was because of one man. Many years ago, this man had been caught in one of the cruelest blizzards ever to blow across the high desert. He was near death when he came upon a small settler's cabin. Settlers took him in, saved his life. The man was so grateful he swore that no traveler in that country would ever suffer from lack of shelter. He built the inn and hosted travelers for the rest of his life. Sometimes it's appropriate for gratitude to go to extremes. Occasionally I've remarked to someone that on the sacrifices they were making to care for an ailing parent. And usually they will say something like, "There is nothing compared to what they did for me when I was growing up." Saying thank you can be a religious act. In fact, everything we do as Christians can be regarded as one great big thank you to God. We share this attitude with our sister faith, Judaism. Both faith communities base their existence on the Hebrew Scriptures. Both faith communities find their origin 35 centuries ago in a story we call the Exodus. God took a band of rebellious slaves, freed them from slavery in Egypt, and formed them into a faith community. Hebrews had done nothing to deserve God's intervention on their behalf. Their transformation from slaves into a nation of priests was entirely the act of a gracious God. So the community was formed and held together by an overwhelming sense of gratitude toward a God who had done great things for them. Reading from the Hebrew Scriptures for this morning is part of the Exodus story. It is that part after God had led the people out of Egypt and up to Mount Sinai. In the book of Exodus, chapter 20, God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. These 10 laws would be the foundation on which hundreds of Jewish religious laws would be based. From the beginning, God linked the giving of the commandments with what had taken place in Exodus chapters 1 through 19. And God summarizes those chapters. "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." God prefaced the commandments as with a reminder to the people of what the Lord had done. So the commandments do not stand on their own. They have no validity apart from the saving act of God. The commandments have the authority and make sense only because of what God did. For instance, the first commandment, worship no other God beside the Lord, makes sense because of all God had done for the Hebrews. God established a unique relationship with Abraham's descendants that was like no other people on earth. God chose Israel to be the people of God, so they had to worship only God. In the light of the Exodus story, the first commandment makes sense. Devoting oneself to the one true God is the only way that Israel could say thank you. The second commandment, that Israel would not worship any carved images. Again, this made Israel unique in the ancient world. Every religion then had carved images to represent their gods. When God appeared to Moses in Exodus chapter 3, and Moses asked for God's name, the Lord said, I am what I am, or according to some translators, I will be what I will be. God is hard to pin down. Images of God are forbidden because no one can say, this is God, this is what I say God is. God will be whatever it will be. God's nature is unknowable. And Israel acknowledges that by not creating carved images. And that was another way of saying thank you. The third commandment is related to the second. Do not take the Lord's name in vain. Some people still think that the commandment still has to do with profanity. To the Hebrews, this law had to do with using God's name to swear falsely, trying to use God's name as a magic word. Ancient people believed that one could control God's power by calling on that God's name. But Israel was forbidden from trying to use God's name for their own selfish purposes. God said, I will be what I will be. Humans cannot control God. On the contrary, the freeing of Israel from Egypt proved that it is God who is in control of human affairs. Respect for God's name is another way that Israel said thank you. The next commandment says Israel is to remember the Sabbath. 1 day in 7 was set aside in which believers were to do no work. The Sabbath is a weekly reminder that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. When God's people rested on the Sabbath, they were reminded that God created the world. God gave human beings permission to subdue the earth. For 6 days out of the week, they work the land. They manipulate and change the earth to suit their purposes. But on the seventh, they are to give it a rest. On the Sabbath day, we have a reminder that though God put us in charge of the earth, we are not the owners. We are only the tenants. The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it. We own none of it, not even our own bodies. We belong to God. So we are to take a break from our busyness once a week as a reminder that neither the earth nor our bodies are ours to do with as we please. Observing the Sabbath is yet another way of saying thank you. We are doing honor to our Creator. And the commandment that follows to honor your father and mother is yet another way of honoring our Creator who used our parents to bring us into being. By respecting our parents, we express our thankfulness to God. The remaining commandments are all negative. We're told not to kill, not to commit adultery, steal, give false testimony, or covet whatever belongs to our neighbor. Together, these negatives add up to one big positive. Through the laws, the community which God created in the Exodus is preserved and protected. Respect for God's community is yet another way of saying thank you to God. Following the whole law was how the faith community expressed its belief and thanksgiving to God. Keeping the commandments was Israel's way of continually saying, "Thank you, Lord." That's important for the Christian community to remember, because we read God's commandments and think, this is what I have to do to get to heaven. But that's not how Israel saw the commandments. God had already saved them from slavery. He had showed them his grace, which they had neither earned nor deserved. Their obedience to the law was their response to the good news of their redemption. What was true for the faith community at Mount Sinai is true for every faith community, including the faith community at Plainville. The important thing to remember is that no matter what good works we do, no one's earning their salvation here. When we do something to express our love for God or our neighbor, we're not totaling up brownie points. We're not doing that. We are expressing our thanksgiving for what God has done for us. Just as God freed Israel from slavery, the same God has freed us from the bondage of our sins through the death of Christ. We represent this sacrificial act of Christ through things like the Lord's Supper. One of the names we have for this meal is Eucharist, Greek word which means thanksgiving. The meal reminds us that we have done nothing to earn or deserve God's favor, but like Israel, we have received blessing upon blessing, freely given to us by a gracious God. We can't pay God back. All we can do is live by the words of the hymn which Isaac Watts wrote over 2 centuries ago. Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were an offering far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, deserves my soul, my life, my all. And that is a sermon for October 4th, 2020. Goodbye, and God bless you all.